Okay, so let's begin. All right, my name is Adolfho Romero. Today's February 9, 2022, and today I'm here with
George Guy.
And we're here to interview
Charmaine Gibson.
All right, and we're here on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and this will be part of the St. Augustine Episcopal Church project and helping create a city marker. And so to begin with, Mr. Reverend Guy, he will be conducting some of those questions, interview questions. Please begin.
Charmaine, is it accurate to say that you are one of the original members of St. Augustine Episcopal Church here in Gainesville, Florida?
Yes.
Do you recall what year you began serving at St. Augustine?
Serving or attending?
Or attending.
At birth. I was baptized at St. Augustine's. My confirmation ceremony was at St. Augustine's. I was an acolyte, the only acolyte at St. Augustine's. And I was at St. Augustine's when it was closed, and those members that were there were transferred formally to Holy Trinity Episcopal Church.
Do you recall what year that was that you were transferred?
It was in the 70s, I believe. Early 70s, possibly.
Okay. Do you recall any of the other communicants from St. Augustine that were also transferred?
Yes.
Can you name them?
My mother, Elizabeth Taylor Gibson. My aunt, Edith Mary Taylor. My father, George Gibson Sr. Albert Daniels. I don't remember Albert's wife's name, but she was also transferred, and I have a picture showing her confirmation class, which verifies that she was a member, because that picture shows the class that was there. I think there were 4 members in that confirmation class of hers. Let's see who else. That's all I can think of right now of who all were officially transferred. I know there were maybe 10 or 11 people that were formally transferred, but right now I can't think of the names of the other people.
Thank you. Why did your mom and your dad want you to become an Episcopalian, Anglican, being of your race, your ethnicity in Gainesville, Florida? Do you know why?
No, not specifically. My grandmother was an Episcopalian, and I guess she raised her daughters and her son in the Episcopalian faith, and so they passed down from generation to generation. So my mom, being an Episcopalian, brought me up from a baby in that faith.
Where was your mother originated from? Where did your mother, your mother's mother from?
Gainesville.
Okay. And she became an Episcopalian in Gainesville?
Yes.
Through St. Augustine?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware of the Episcopal Church, the first Episcopal Church in the state of Florida, being in Key West, Florida?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Are you aware that Episcopalians in the state of Florida used to be, well, they originated from the Caribbean islands, and that's why they originally came to Key West, Florida?
Not aware of that in the past, but I've become aware of that in that I've traveled to a couple of Caribbean islands, specifically Trinidad and Tobago. And in the times that I've gone there, I experienced being around people that lived on those islands. Being Anglican, I attended church with them when I've traveled. So that's where I first learned about Black people from other places other than Florida and the United States, being Anglican.
When did you become aware of the St. Augustine Parochial School being in its existence while you were growing up?
When I attended the daycare center that came after the parochial school closed, and that daycare center was operated by the director of the daycare center was my mother. So when I got of age, say 2.5, 3, I started to go to the daycare center with my mom every day. But we had relatives, I think cousins, that were involved in establishing that parochial school, but that was before my time. So I only knew about the daycare center, not the parochial school. But like I say, we did have members in our family that helped establish and worked at and maybe taught at the parochial school.
Can you tell us where the parochial school was located at? Is it present day where the daycare is or was?
The parochial school for African Americans was at the site that we're calling the St. Augustine Episcopal Church.
Another question I had, what year were you baptized? What time was this around?
I was born in 1952, and pictures that I've seen of my baptism, if not in 52, 53. I don't think I was walking at the time that I was baptized, because we baptized as babies.
Mm-hmm.
So the church was active at that point still.
Yes.
And your parents, do you remember when they started joining in? When were they introduced, or they started joining in the Episcopal Church at that time?
Like I say, this was they probably attended when my grandmother was there. So we're talking probably the 20s. Yeah. If not earlier.
You mentioned you had a brother who also attended St. Augustine.
I'm assuming he did, but I have no remembrance of him going to church with us as a family. There's like 12 years difference in age between my brother and I. And by the time I got old enough, I think, to remember going to the church, he probably was, if not gone off to college, maybe in high school, and maybe wasn't attending regularly. I can't be sure, but like I say, I don't have any remembrance of going to church with him, with the family.
Do you recall any of the visiting priests that said Mass at St. Augustine?
I have a recollection of a black priest, and I only remember his last name, Satterwhite. And I think he was the priest during my mother's early attendance and my grandmother's attendance. The priest that I remember at the time that I was an Acolyte was Reverend Leslie Batchelder, and he was a white priest.
Any of your friends attending other churches and in other denominations ever talk to you specifically about what is the Episcopal Church? What is the Black Episcopal Church? What is it about? What is its difference? Why is it Protestant but operates like Catholic?
Never had conversations on that subject. When I attended St. Augustine's, we used to have Bible study on Sunday afternoons, and several young people my age that lived in the neighborhood. In fact, across the street, there were 3 kids my age, well, families had kids my age, and then a couple of other kids. Bible study was mostly attended by school-age kids. I don't remember when we had Bible study in the afternoons, adults attending. It was only for kids. And I would say probably there would be 6 to 8 of us that attended Bible study on Sunday afternoons.
And it was taught by the priests?
No, it was by visiting. There were ladies that came in. I don't know if they were members of Holy Trinity or not, but no, the priest did not conduct the Bible studies.
Mm-hmm. So it was conducted by lay persons, is that correct?
Yes.
What influence did you have upon your friends that you attended public school with when it came regards to what the Episcopalian faith was all about? Or did that conversation ever come up?
It never came up.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in the city of Gainesville there is a lot of African American participation in the Episcopalian Anglican faith?
At this present time?
Yes.
No. The closest that I think that it comes is the AME Church.
Okay.
And that has Episcopal, that's the E in the AME.
I was wondering, back in the day, how would people go into the church? Would they drive, walk? Was it only like locals being part of the Episcopal Church during that time, or would they come from the railroads? Because back then, that's how they would travel. I'm just trying to.
When I attended, families drove there. The handful of families that attended St. Augustine's. Now, when the daycare center operated, which was on the left-hand side of that building, that was the daycare, the right-hand side was the church. And as I said earlier, my mom was the director of the daycare center. My dad would drop us off in the morning, and then he went on to his job at the University of Florida. And then in the afternoons, we would walk to downtown and catch the bus back home, which was in East Gainesville. I also worked in the afternoons. I attended Buchholz High School when it was located downtown where the 720 building is. I attended 9th grade there. And from there, I went to GHS for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. At the point that I was able to drive, I started driving to school, and then I would drive. My mother never learned to drive. My mother and I would drive home in the afternoons because I would stay until 6 o'clock for late pickup for the kids that attended the daycare center.
Back in the day, do you remember as a kid, I guess at that time, maybe early on, do you remember how the community was around the church? Was it a white community, black community? What was it back then? How was it?
It was a black community, and it was mixed with middle class people as well as some lower income people, but it was mostly a middle class neighborhood. In fact, just a block down from the church, the local black dentist and doctor had a house which is on the historic, well, it burned down 2 years ago. Dr. Cosby, Edgar Cosby, he was the first black dentist in Gainesville. And then he married Leslie Parker Cosby. Her father was the first black doctor in Gainesville, and they lived a block away from St. Augustine's. There were other professional people that also had homes within a block, 2 blocks. So it was a pretty middle class, upper middle class neighborhood that was there. Lots of teachers lived in that area. My godmother lived a block away, and she was a teacher. But there was no integration in that area. And oddly enough, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, George, 2 blocks down where Santa Fe Community College is, that used to be the train station. That building, the train that ran south and all the way north to New York was right there. But for some reason, it ran through a black neighborhood. But that was the train station for all of Gainesville.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. So earlier you mentioned that you talked about the Sunday services. Were there other services aside Sunday services at the church? Were there
any other services?
Yeah.
Other than Bible study, and the occasional confirmation, baptism, no.
Do we know when the transition happened between the church and then the daycare, or was it simultaneously?
No, the parochial school was there before it became a daycare center.
Okay.
And I don't know when it stopped being a parochial school and when it became a daycare center, because my mom was already operating as the director of the daycare center when I started attending. But it's my understanding that my mom worked at the parochial school. I don't know in what capacity. And because she worked at the parochial school, that's how she transitioned into being the director of the daycare center.
Would you consider the neighborhood in Gainesville, 5th Avenue, 4th Avenue, in that particular area, during a period from the 1940s, 30s, 20s, as the black bourgeois of Gainesville?
That area was the hub of black Gainesville for many, many years. I mean, you had businesses, you had restaurants, barbershops, commissary stores, beauty shops, Lincoln High School was there, which is now
Lincoln Middle School.
Yeah. Well, no. I'm talking about 8th Avenue, and it's not called Lincoln anymore, but that's where Lincoln High originated. Do you know where the Democratic political office is?
Yes.
On 8th Avenue?
Yes.
And you know that huge red big building? That was the original Lincoln High School.
Wow.
And it stayed Lincoln until they built the new Lincoln on Waldo Road.
Right.
It's not called Lincoln now. I'm trying to think of what they call that building now, but that whole thing there, across the street from that 2-story red brick building that was old Lincoln. You have the principal, his house, which has been made into a museum now. All of that is in that area. That whole section that goes all the way to 13th Street, that was the black hub of Gainesville. I lived out in East Gainesville. My family lived out in East Gainesville, but when we wanted to seek entertainment or we wanted to seek a service, whether it be to go to the dentist or the doctor or go out for entertainment, that area, that was it for people in Gainesville.
Did you consider that section equal or superior? Equal
At the
to
time,
the white area, or did you know the difference between them?
I considered it in some ways superior because it provided for all of the needs of my family being Black at the time. When I got older, especially at the point that I decided to leave Lincoln High and take part in the integration that was made available, and I did that starting in 9th grade, then I learned that it wasn't equal. It was a rude awakening, attending Buhos downtown for that 1 year in 9th grade, and later going to Gainesville High School. Like I say, it was a rude awakening. But before then, I didn't think that there was any difference because we had everything in our community that we needed. And through integration, I learned that we didn't.
Did you see a difference in when you joined, for instance, Holy Trinity, which was predominantly white, during the time you joined? Did you see a superiority in the way you were used to worshiping at St. Augustine versus how you're now worshiping at Holy Trinity? If so, to what degree was the differences were? Or what were the differences?
The biggest difference that stands out to me is at St. Augustine's, we were so small. We were like family, the members that attended. And I didn't have that feeling when I came to Holy Trinity. And that had an influence on me in the early years of the transfer. It had an influence on me. And then being young and crazy, not attending for a while. I would attend sporadically when we were first transferred over to Holy Trinity. I didn't have that feeling of not welcomeness, but the feeling of belonging and family that I had at St. Augustine's. And I really can't tell you when I changed and decided to come back and start attending regularly. But even now, I attend on a regular basis, but I don't belong or associate with any of the activities that Holy Trinity provides. You know, I come to Sunday services, but I'm not a member of this guild or any of the things that Holy Trinity offers. I know that they have things like the choir, you know, me being a past Acolyte. I haven't thought about, looking into, doing that. In fact, I haven't had any, I'm going to be honest, any desire to want to expand my relationship with Holy Trinity other than just attending on Sunday services.
Is it because you were not approached by anyone from Holy Trinity, administration, clergy, etc., for you to be a part of Holy Trinity in your giving to participate? Specifically, during the period of the late Reverend Earl Page, from 1960 through 1985, was there a difference in his administration, for instance, for which he by himself recommended to the diocese that 10 families from St. Augustine Episcopal Church be admitted, since St. Augustine Church was closed down by the diocese on or about 1970. Was there any mentioning by himself or his dear wife, Anne, about participating in the beyond worship service on Sundays?
Directly to me, no, but other members of my family, I know my mom had ongoing relationship with the Pages prior to her death. My Aunt Edith, she became a member of the folk choir, and before she became disabled, she would she volunteer to work. There was a group that she volunteered with, I think on Wednesdays. They came to put out the bulletins. So she was very involved, and I can't say whether or not my mom or aunt were approached to do those things, or whether or not they just naturally fell into it. But no, I was not. I've never been personally approached by any member of Holy Trinity administration to join or ask of my interest in joining anything.
To your recollection, what do you know about the late Reverend Earl Page at Holy Trinity?
What I know about him is his interaction with my mom. He was very active in assisting and working with her in the daycare center, getting her involved with A4Cs. I remember that being an agency that my mom was active in. So what I know about Reverend Page is through my mom. I mean, I knew him because I attended church and I knew he was the priest, but there was no personal interaction between me and him. So, like I say, I only know about that through my mom.
At St. Augustine, was there an organ, a piano, or music? Or did you sing a cappella?
Um, I don't remember a piano or an organ. I'm sure we did sing. So my best recollection is a cappella.
Here it is in the year 2022, and that was approximately, I don't know, over 50 years ago. Do you think that was equal? Not to have music?
You mean
Or to sing?
played music?
Yeah. Or to have a piano, to have an organ for this little old church?
I really didn't think about it back during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, it's only since I got older did I pick up on the disparities. I attended because I had relatives that were of other faiths, like mostly Baptists, and I would attend church from time to time. They would sing without having, a piano or an organ. It's only here recently that I've gone to other churches, denominations that they have an organ and they have like a band with drums and the piano players, and you see in the paper and the classifieds where they're looking for a music director for a church, so it's only recently that I think that it's a disparity looking back. But at the time, no, I didn't see that as a disparity.
Being a lifelong resident of Gainesville, Florida, in your opinion, how many approximately you think African American Episcopals in this Gainesville area?
I don't have any idea, but my best guess would be that it's limited. Because I have attended other Episcopal churches in Gainesville, St. Michael's, and I've attended the University of Florida. I don't know the name of it. The Episcopal Church on the University of Florida campus. And the few times that I've gone to those other churches, I can count on one hand the amount of Black people that were in attendance. Maybe it was an off day that I went, but it's my guess is that it's limited.
Well, I don't know that you know this, but I was born and raised in Harlem, New York, and we went to, as a little boy, well, I've never been little, but anyway, I was much younger, okay. And on Lenox Avenue, which is the west side of Harlem, there's an east and a west, and the west side of Harlem, we lived on Lenox Avenue, not far from Harlem Hospital. And the church with the big red doors, as we called it, St. Mary's, was on 125th Street, near 125th Street. And we walked there, and I remember about 4 or 5 years old, and they served cookies and milk. So we went every Sunday. And It was a glorious affair. We was always waiting for Sunday to come, get them free cookies and milk. But you had to earn them cookies and milk at this big old Episcopal church that was very, very well attended by different ethnicities. It was Latina, it was persons from the Caribbean. It was Italian people that were kicked out the Catholic Church. There were Jewish people there. There were all kinds of people there. Okay, and in Sunday school we had to read at 3 and 4 years old, and that's where I learned how to read in the Episcopal Church. And everyone had an assignment every week to get them cookies and milk. And you know, the priest would be walking with us and, you know, petting our heads and stuff like that. And we would call the ropes that they wore, you know, we would hold on to the ropes, you know, before they started the mass, you know. And we would play with them, you know, in the vesting room, you know, and stuff like that. And, like, we would play like cowboys and stuff like that, you know. And that's how I got involved in the Episcopal Church in Harlem. It's still there. It's a huge church, but it's still multicultural. Okay, it's not a lot of one race there, but very equal. But yeah, we started back in those days. You went to Sunday school and you learned the catechism as well. Through these booklets they had once a week, and you had a homework assignment. You had to come back with, you know, this was before you went to school. Mm-hmm. You know, you had to learn how to read. And back in those days, I'm talking the 50s, okay, you know, radio was everything. We didn't have no television. And had no television until I graduated in high school in the late 60s. So, mid-60s or whatever. But radio and reading, that's what we did. A lot of reading back in those days. But Sunday school, you learned how to read. You learned where your address was, your telephone number, if you had a telephone. Most people where I lived didn't have a telephone. Okay. But the Episcopal Church did that. The Baptist Church didn't do it. The Methodist Church didn't do it. Some AME churches may have done it, but we selected that church because the cookies and milk, and they taught us how to read. So that was why we went that particular church.
You just brought up another memory. My grandmother had 2 sons. One died, I think he may have been 3 or 4 years old. But the one son that lived, he served in the military. And when he got out of the military, he lived in New York. And my grandmother I guess I might have been maybe 6 or 7 years old, every summer, she and I would catch the train right down the street and go to New York. And we would spend the whole summer up there with that uncle. And when I would go with my grandmother, with her being from the South and used to going to church, I can remember her going to church up in New York and me going with her. And the faint remembrance that I have, it was a big church that we'd go to. It was an Episcopal church. I don't remember the name. But after you're talking about the church you went to, I'm wondering if that was the church, because that my uncle and her and I would go to when I would go there on, during the summers. It's very likely that
yeah, it's an extremely popular church
It's a big church,
It's
right?
a huge church.
Okay, yeah, this
And
was
that's why we
my
call it
remembrance
the
is a
church with the
huge
big red
church.
doors. It had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 entrances with those huge 10-foot red doors, and had a basement in it, and it had a parochial school too, just like St. Augustine, and it had a nursery school too, and but it was multicultural. It still is actually, but during that period of time, when I came through, see, my mother was originated from the islands anyway, so that's all the faith she ever knew was Anglican, and coming here was Episcopalian. So, she always wanted to get back into the hook that way, and she had never, before coming to this country, she never heard of Baptists or Methodists or anything like that. It was always Anglican, always. But at that particular church, and it still is even today, hundreds of persons from the island still attend that church. Churches in Harlem are huge and have a lot of multicultural members, especially now. But my sister still goes to that church.
Where is Amsterdam Avenue in regard to?
Amsterdam is on the west side. It's a very good area.
Because that's where my uncle lived, on Amsterdam Avenue.
Well, he would have probably gone to St. Mary's. Definitely. Because it's not far at all, walking. And but it still has a rich tradition even today. And in fact, one of my patients went over the VA hospital. I had a patient that he was white, but he attended that church, and his father did too. And his father remarried and couldn't get back into Catholic Church, so they took him. Okay. So, but he always remembered. He said, "You look like you." He said, "Chaplain, you look familiar." I said, "Oh, I don't know you." He said, "You ever attend a church with the big red doors in Harlem on 120? Yeah. I know you." I was shocked. He later died, but the fact of the matter is, I was very, 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 very proud, and we had a huge gymnasium and track. Okay, and that's where we play basketball. Indoors. And back in those days, the churches was the only recreation center that you had that was self-sufficient. So we would do Bible study, and as we got older, we played basketball. And they had a church league, and it was very, very competitive, very, very competitive. And but I still remember playing basketball there, and all the Roman Catholic churches that we played against them too. And they would come play against us, but they considered us Catholic as well. So
watered down Catholics.
Yeah. But that kept us out of trouble. It really did. The church did. And I just remember the priests that were very, very, very strict on us, very strict, and they would never leave us alone, never. Because we get them ropes. And those are childhood memories are good memories and what have you. But that's how my Latin brothers and sisters that still live there, that's how we always communicated and got along very well. That's why I don't know nothing about prejudice until I come down here.
The South.
Yes.
My next question that I had, it was, what are some of your fondest memories of St. Augustine Episcopal Church? Can you tell us a little bit, like maybe guide us inside? Were there windows out there? I'm just trying to imagine the landscape. How would you put it out there?
Well, I have pictures which you all are gonna get copies of. It was small. There were windows all around. The altar itself was small. which is shown in one of the pictures. I guess the fondest memories that I have are serving as an acolyte and participating in baptisms, and we only had a few baptisms because most of the families that attended had children that were older. And then the confirmation ceremonies. And my confirmation, I remember it because the priest that came to do the confirmation ceremony, we were kneeling down at the altar. And as the priest went to each one, he placed his hands on the head. We were kneeling with our head bowed, and he placed his hands on the top of our heads. And he came to me. Now, I don't remember how many were in my confirmation class. He came to me. I felt his hands on my head. He moved to the next person. I still felt his hands on my head. And I remember that to this day. And I'm going, wow. You know, something's going on here. You know, he doesn't have his hands on my head anymore. I'm looking at him putting his hands on the next person, but I'm still feeling his hands on my head. So that's a recollection that has stayed with me for a long time.
How did you get involved to become an acolyte? Did you ask your parents first? Did you just go in there and said one day I want to participate, become an acolyte, or what is the process on your end?
I was the only, at that time that I became an acolyte, I was the oldest child in attendance at St. Augustine's. And so it was like I became it. And an acolyte was needed. And with me being the oldest, natural selection.
You jumped in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Charmaine, for those persons that do not know what an acolyte is, that communicates, participates, wrong word, in the service, in the Mass, could you describe briefly what an acolyte does? And what you did to assist the priest?
Well, it's an assisting person within the church behind the altar, because we had a rail that separated the altar from the congregation.
It's called a sanctuary.
And so I assisted by carrying the cross in.
Which type cross?
Which type cross?
Yeah.
Well,
there's two crosses, basically, that acolytes carry, the big cross and the small cross.
What was a big one?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I had to dress in the
and an alb, A-L-B, it's called an alb.
Okay.
The white.
The black and white. The bottom was black, the top was white, and I wore what I call a beanie.
Right.
On my head.
Right.
And then during communion, I would assist the priest in preparing the communion, the wine vessel, and the wafer plate. And I would, once he's given, I would hold either the wafer or the wine cup while he's doing communion. After communion, then I would be responsible for the cleanup. It's not a cleanup, but any wafers that were left or any wine that was left, making sure that it was all disposed of, because it was blessed. So you can't just throw it out. You have to consume it. That was another fond memory.
That's why.
Being a child, you know, having the leftover wine, and because we didn't have grape juice. That separates us from the Baptists.
Right.
And the Methodists. They use grape juice. We use the real deal.
Still do.
So that was another fond memory that I have, is being able to eat the leftover wafers and drink the leftover wine.
And you extinguished the candles and you lit the candles, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that reminds me really close. I had asked that question too, because I was an altar server when I joined, through the Catholics, altar server, and a lot of the processes or the same procedures sort of are very similar, but it kind of makes sense just based off what we're talking about and how like the church denominations build upon each other to an extent, and a lot of those traditions is still rituals still we're part of in different groups too, which is that's good. Like a question I have. So we're here in 2022, as Reverend Guy was mentioning. How did this project begin? Right now, we're working towards a marker. You've been working, you two together, really extremely hard on this to make it happen. Where did that idea come from, and how did it develop?
Reverend Guy.
All right.
Honestly, it never occurred to me, being a member of St. Augustine's and then subsequently transferring over here to Holy Trinity, it never occurred to me to do something to preserve that portion of my religious history. And George brought it up one day to me. Well, he asked some questions about it, and that's where it originated from, and he's the spark for this whole thing.
And how do you know Reverend Guy? How did you meet Reverend Guy?
We're both members of Holy Trinity.
Okay. All right. And right now, what are the next stages according to the project? How's that going? How's the whole process looking so far to completion? I guess making it seem the whole picture.
Well, he's been bulldozing it, so it's looking good. It's gone from an idea now into becoming a reality that is within grasp.
Well said. Well said. More importantly, it's not because it's Black History Month, the month of February. However, it's very, very, very important to American history, putting politics aside, that we honor all Americans and all history within the United States and the culture for which we were born and raised. This Gainesville, Florida, happens to be a special place, and it has special historical knowns and unknowns. The most important thing here is to educate the public. Many, many, many lifelong Gainesville residents have not and never knew that a African American Episcopal church ever existed in this town, and furthermore did not know that it also had a very successful parochial school back in its day that only went to the 3rd grade, and that was because persons of color could not be educated beyond the 3rd grade because of the bias, the prejudice, outright discrimination. At that time was the rule of law. You didn't argue against that, but that was due to slavery as well. Okay. So, and tradition has a lot to do with a lot of what happens politically and non-politically, unfortunately. So what we want to do here, and should have been done long time ago, is to document the history of St. Augustine and actually African American Episcopalians within the state of Florida, and their contributions as well to this very successful state of Florida. And the history, believe it or not, has to be told, because it's not told. Persons been living here all their lives, never knew this type of church ever existed. Still don't know today what it's all about. Okay. So it is our job to right the wrong, and right the wrong means put it out there, all of the history, good, bad, and the ugly. And, for persons, especially our younger generations, to understand and have them make a conscious decision about where and who and what history is all about. Because if you know where you came from, you know where you're going.
Have you found any difficulty tracing down the history, or anyone reluctant to provide you information during the process of researching all this information?
That's a very good question. It's not that they don't know. It's not that they're not forthcoming in getting the information. They don't know how to obtain the information. And that's a process through history in the state of Florida. Record keeping in the state of Florida really did not take place on the public scene until the late 40s, early 50s. So documentation prior to 1945, for instance, never existed. It wasn't a requirement. Everything was handwritten, and basically during those days, if someone witnessed something, with their own eyes, you can document it that way. And through the oral history program, Sam Proctor, is how we're getting documented these special events like St. Augustine's. Okay, and it's through that vessel, vessel that communication in history of all ethnicities is made available and will be made available through the University of Florida and other areas of public information, the library, et cetera, et cetera. But church history is the most important element here. There is a rich Episcopal church history that's well documented, okay, through the Episcopal Church, okay. But the Episcopal Church and the Diocese of Florida, which is located in Jacksonville, which actually owns this building and that building as well, okay, and owns still St. Augustine's, okay. They know very little about the history of that church, even. There was a Mr. Bentley, who was a historian, and a historian for the whole Diocese of Florida. He wrote a book of the history of Holy Trinity, which included or includes the history of St. Augustine as well. And it was only through Holy Trinity that we're getting all of this information. But public persons could not obtain this information otherwise. And then we really want to get the state marker to document this historical landmark, because it's over 75 years old, over 100 years old, this church.
All right. Would you mind giving us maybe a quick, whatever knowledge you have on top of your head, I guess right now, maybe like some timeline, sort of a timeline of what came first, and then how it went to a daycare, because we have the church, we have the school, and then we have the daycare. Can you give us sort of like a time frame on that?
Sure. On or about 1896, through the Trinity Parish, as it was called, meetings, which was Holy Trinity, they were located on Main Street, where the Masonic building is right now, and it was a different kind of building. It was a wooden building. The church existed then, but what happened was many persons of color wanted to attend Holy Trinity Church, and they were not permitted to attend the church because they were persons of color. So the bishop ordered the assembly of a church, and that church was called St. Augustine Church, Episcopal Church. In 1907, the former Holy Trinity Episcopal Church was actually moved to the 405 Northwest 4th Avenue location of St. Augustine Episcopal Church. It was moved in the street by African American. At the time, we were not African Americans, we were Negroes and carpenters. And we moved, the church was moved to its original site. And it, on or about from 1907 through the 1930s, 1920s, became a church and church school. And because this church was located on the northwest section, it provided a public education up to the 3rd grade, and then eventually to the 6th grade for persons of color. The church, the parochials, this was the first also African American or colored church for persons of color, located on the northwest section. The other colored schools were located on the southeast section and the northeastern sections of Gainesville. There were a lot of famous persons that attended St. Augustine's Church, and at one time they had at the church school 1,000 students, and the majority of the students were female, and that as they became older, they were taught other skills, domestic skills, and how to care for persons, white persons mostly, and their families and their rich homes. And the boys were taught how to become carpenters, auto mechanics, etc., through this parochial school education, which only went to the 3rd grade for many, many, many years. but no other colored school went beyond the third, public school went beyond the third grade either. Then it went to the sixth grade. That was the unbalanced system in America. Persons of color, meaning and including indigenous, Native Americans as well, Asian Americans as well, persons that were not white, Anglo-Saxon type persons. There was a period, that was a dark period, but it wasn't seen by the people of color as a dark period. It was just another period. They became used to being treated inferior, as inferior persons. So for those many years, there was no changes. And integration started basically in the 1960s, late 60s. Of course, the school had been closed down by that time. And in 1968, the federal laws were changed and mandated discrimination be abolished. But up to that period of time in the South, in Gainesville, Florida, separate and unequal was the rule of law. You could not attend a predominantly white school if you were African American or a person of color. Not in Gainesville. And you really couldn't live other than in the southeast or the northeastern sections.
Did we find out? Did you ever find out in your search the reason why the church itself closed down, and how it became a daycare? And right now, what is it currently? The building is being used for?
Well, the church was closed down in 1970 by the bishop, and that was due to a lack of enrollment. Okay. It was always a small church for just those persons that worshiped in that particular faith, in this particular area, which was very few.
Do you think at that point, because...
But let me finish. The reason for that is because most African American people, black people at the time, attending their own churches of the Baptist faith, the AME faith, and the Methodist faith, and other faiths, they had freedom within the Episcopal Church, which was 99% white, okay, even though many of its congregants were persons of color. They were still not treated equal. So the majority, you go where you're treated well and among your own people. And that's why many persons of color that were born and raised during the same period of time knew nothing about this, another Protestant church, but a different faith that came from another country, basically, and settled here. And they did not understand why those persons migrated from the southern Florida areas, close to the Caribbeans, including Cuba and the other islands, who worshiped the Anglican faith, which Episcopalian really is, Anglican, okay? The rest of the world, we're known as Anglican, not Episcopal. Only in the United States are we considered Episcopalians, okay? So we have both, but we're all Anglicans at that point. So at this point, we're trying to level the playing field in the city of Gainesville, and putting this package out and this presentation out will put everyone on notice about this Protestant faith having not only white members, but Black members as well on a national basis.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking that question is because I'm thinking about Fifth Avenue, like the way that we were talking about how these communities were prosperous back in the day. So, what happened to the community at that point? Like, when did it start decreasing, or were people moving away, or what happened? Did they become like disenfranchised, or I'm just trying to figure out maybe a loss of population?
It's called the University of Florida.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, when integration came, that was the end of separate and unequal, basically, technically. But if you've always been unequal, you don't know the difference anyway. You don't know what equal is if you've always been unequal. You don't know any better. You live with it. You live with it. Okay. Now, where I was born and raised in Harlem in New York, for instance, we were given the choices of what's right and what's wrong. And we were encouraged to fight for what's right. But here in Gainesville, those same persons that look like me were not afforded these efforts of freedom. They were always on that side, and they were very comfortable on that side because they were taught from babies, you stay in your lane. And that's fear. That is nothing more than fear. And fear breeds racism. Fear. If you're scared of a mosquito biting you and you're getting malaria, you have a fear. And that fear could come true. And there is no cure to malaria.
Back to the comment that I made about the University of Florida encroaching. My memory of what used to be the hub of the Black community on this side of town, the University of Florida started absorbing and pushing people out, mostly towards southeast Gainesville and northeast Gainesville, because they had the need to expand. And it's the same thing that the thing that happened here with the University of Florida taking over the Black area that was the hub here. It happened up in Tallahassee with Florida State. Florida State started expanding, and it started expanding. There's a hub in Tallahassee, similar to what the area that we had here. And Florida State just came in and wiped out that community up there, and pushed them to other places because they needed to expand. I attended the University of Florida, and when I went there, the classes that I took, I could count on literally one hand the other Black students that were in the classes that I took. Maybe it's the path that I chose. My undergraduate degree was in history, and my graduate degree was in special education. Like I say, I can count on one hand the number of Black students that were in the class. There were a lot of Black athletes at that time that I attended, mostly football. And because basketball teams are much smaller, There were, quite a few black basketball players, but attending the University of Florida during the time that I attended, that was another place that I don't have any fond memories of. I got my education there, but there was no assimilation. Like I say, when integration occurred, that's when I became aware of what discrimination was, because I was encased within my community before that, so I did not know what discrimination was. And my parents, luckily enough, they did a lot of sheltering with me. But then as I grew older and I got out and went to mostly white high schools and especially University of Florida, it was a rude awakening. It really was.
Do you remember any of those experiences at the University of Florida where you felt like were people prejudiced or racism was
definitely
straightforward, not even
definitely
trying to cover it up? They were just
definitely they weren't covering anything up. It was, they were quite blatant about it, and really, other than flat out asking, well, why you come here? There are black colleges that you could attend. And my thing was, my parents didn't have enough money to send me off to the black colleges. The closest one was probably in Daytona, Bethune-Cookman. My brother, who, when he came through, he was not eligible to go to any white university. So he started out at Morehouse in Atlanta, and then he graduated from Bethune-Cookman in Daytona, because he didn't have the option to go to the University of Florida. And I saw where it was a financial burden for my parents to send him to those schools, because there was no such thing as a scholarship. They had to pay their way. So I wanted to lessen the burden on them when I, became college age. And I said, well, I'll just stay home and go to school here. And I took out student loans, which I paid back. I'm one of only a few people that paid back. It took me 10 years to pay the loan off, but I paid back my student loan. But like I said, I really don't have any fond memories of attending the University of Florida. And people, they don't understand when I tell them I'm not a Gator. I said, you had to go through the time that I went to the University of Florida. There was nothing positive that makes me want to declare to the world that I went to the University of Florida. I had friends that were athletes, but they came from other cities, around Florida. But it is what it is.
I mean, you're not too far away from reality, and even in 2022, I mean, just looking at enrollment rates, the university only having about 7% student body, African American or blacks in here, and even professors even less, so that tells you something about the university, and inclusiveness of how inclusive they are, in parentheses, I guess, or comas.
Well, there's one more important thing you have to realize. In the city of Gainesville, in the state of Florida, if it's not considered wrong, you don't fix it, right? If it's not broke, you don't fix it. For a public college institution, it's a land-grant school, the University of Florida. And it's supposed to be open for every person, But that wasn't the rule. Only in the 70s were even women allowed, let alone minorities. Okay? That is not a long time ago. It's not. So they didn't see what they were doing was even wrong. And if it wasn't because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, no one would be admitted. No one other than those Anglo-Saxons. Okay.
Didn't they recently have, I don't know, it was a documentary. Something happened in Gainesville within the last couple of weeks. Was it considered Black Monday or something, where Black students Black Thursdays, where, you know, the Black students were arrested and expelled because they dared to protest for wanting more from the University of Florida?
Yeah, we actually, one of our staff members, she actually opened up the exhibition I think it was last week at the Matheson Museum, and just to explain about Black Thursday, you know, and even then, like, she would get backlash for trying to dig in that information from the university itself. So it wasn't an easy task to gather, but at least now we're able to like have an open conversation about it. And hey, this is very important. Even in our reunion back at African American Studies 50th reunion, was it? I remember we interviewed a lot of people that were back in the 70s that attended the university, and like how some professors would not let them complete their degrees, or they would find excuses not to move them forward, you know, because they're like, no, you're not going to get through this. But like, I think they were really, really smart individuals and study hard, work hard, you know, put in the time, and they exceeded. But they had a lot of problems just to even try to get a certificate or get their diploma. It wasn't easy. They didn't make it easy, let's just say that.
No, and then there was a darker period where to get federal funding, they had to placate their acceptance of integration. So you pass a student or you admit a student that really isn't qualified, okay, through a program, a national program, or a governmental program, and then you pass them through. Well, that's not right either. But in the grand scheme of things, it was far less that were like that got a ride, okay, than it was hardworking. Now, if you came from an underprivileged high school that didn't even teach what you were going to major in college, well, you doesn't mean that you don't know it. You just didn't have it. So you're going backwards, okay? You set me up to fail. You understand? Okay, we opened the doors for you, but you didn't have this to major in engineering here. And you're set up to fail. Okay, go to the black college. It's right across the street from the white college, okay? Florida State and Florida A&M, they're right next door to each other, across the street. The engineering program now is together because Florida A&M's lost their accreditation, okay? So they don't really know the difference between equality up there or not. They still have separate and unequal education, one against the other, in 2022. Okay? So the state of Florida, out of all the states, southern states, unlike Texas even, black colleges are separate and unequal in most cases. Mm-hmm. And they're established by whites, basically. They're funded a lot by whites, okay? Just so they could be separate and unequal. So outside of Howard University in Washington, D.C., in an all-black neighborhood, and a few other institutions of higher learning throughout the United States and the South, do you have equality? But it is a major difference going from the University of Florida and being educated there versus going to Florida A&M or Bethune-Cookman. Depends on what you're majoring in Bethune-Cookman. Most of my family graduated from there, but they were all teachers. And their education program is still superior, okay? Still superior. Nursing as well, okay? But anything else? Tuition? Here. So, while we're in 2022, a lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same, unfortunately. And what we want to do here with this program, we just want to get it out there to let everyone know. And this church, Holy Trinity Episcopal Church, is a liberal church. There are all kinds of liberals here that believe in freedom for all people and all ethnicities. And that's its backbone in history for over 100 years. And if it wasn't because of Holy Trinity Episcopal Church, there wouldn't have never been a St. Augustine Church. So we want to celebrate that noble endorsement for freedom for all. And I don't think I could say it any better.
Love it. I think it came up with.
Okay. Did I say anything that was out of order? Okay. And I'm not from this area, but I do empathize. I can put myself in, Charmaine's shoes. I really could. Okay. And I don't know today whether I would still be standing. Okay. Because I would not have put up with this. No. I've been in jail. I've been in jail. Okay. Like Mandela.
You also went to school, right, Reverend Guy? Can you tell us a little bit about where did you go to and what did you major in?
Well, I went to school in New York and New York City. I went to undergraduate school at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, which is over almost 200 years old. And I majored in civil engineering. Very tough school. My graduate studies were in St. Louis and what have you. And I was what we call a project executive for the largest building construction company in the United States, Turner Construction Company, for many years. And I managed several projects at one time. And my specialty still is hospital construction. That's how I came here. For the University of Florida, the big one, okay, on Archer Road. We were the #1 healthcare contractor, still are, in the United States, actually in the world. And we built that huge facility and replaced the medical school as well. And it was the #1 project, and it was done very, very cheaply. In 1980s, it was only 1.6 million, which was a lot of money back in those days. And a lot of these areas, I travel along Archer Road, are very new. It was all wooded areas, basically. And this is the only state I've ever worked in as a professional that I was ever called out of my name. I was called the N-word, only in this state. Myself and the other project engineer, we were transferred out of here because we were approached by some people, contractors and what have you, not the university. And they were very, very prejudiced. So we started the project and they transferred us. I went back to Boston Children's Hospital and finished that project, yes. Mm-hmm. I've been on some huge projects, including the World Trade Center in 1997, the rebuilding of it, yes, from the first bombing, yes. Mm-hmm. But mostly hospitals, huge hospitals. Uh-huh.
That's impressive. I was wondering, by any chance, Charmaine, maybe you might know, was there back in the day like a specific black hospital for individuals, or how, like if somebody had an accident, where would they go to get treated?
Before my time, it was at home. People like my mother and my grandmother, they were treated at home. During my time, I was actually born in the one hospital that began to accept black people, and that was Alachua General.
Mm-hmm.
So, but prior to that, blacks were not treated in hospitals.
Mm-mm. She is totally correct. And many persons died as a result of that. For instance, my dear aunt, who's deceased now, she died of TB back in the 40s and 50s because she could not go to the University of Florida's hospital because she was African American or colored or black. Yes. So she had to go to a sanatorium in St. Augustine for colored persons, for which a medical doctor would see patients every other week. And she died. There was no medication or anything like that. So a lot of what Charmaine is saying is very, 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 very true and it's factual. To some persons now, it appears that it's not a big deal. So what? But when you're expended and you're thought of as less than human and less than a human being and very inferior, many people still have that idea. And not just with black people, but with minorities, especially Asian Americans and Jewish Americans, especially in this town. And my colleague, we were selected by the University of Florida because of our experience and our education to run this project here. Okay. We just happened to be minorities, basically. He was Jewish and he wore a yarmulke. Okay. And he was made fun of. Okay. But he was an Ohio State graduate and same civil engineering program. Okay. So they got the best, but most people, when I went for the interview here at the University of Florida, I had to show my driver's license to prove who I was because the resume didn't fit the person. This big black guy comes in here and they says, well, you didn't go to that school, did you? Who did this? Who are you? Show me a driver's license. What kind of interview is that? I was in the early 80s. Okay. So it was funny to me. It was really funny to me. So I began to take off my shoe and I says, well, you want to measure my feet? Yeah. But I'm a New Yorker, so I can get away with it. But I meant it. But the fact of the matter is, when you tell that same true story to someone else, they think it's funny. It's not funny. Why should you assume that I'm not good enough to go to a ranked school or schools like that and have all of this experience, okay, from the biggest and the best? And Joel, my same buddy, okay, and he's wearing a yarmulke because he's practicing his faith. What difference does it make? But here, it made a difference. They didn't want us. No.
Welcome to the South.
Thank you. So, one phone call, we were out of here. They didn't have the best team. We finished the job, but won all kinds of awards and what have you. And we finished the job because the architect and the engineer refused to build the project without us. That's the reason why. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Took all credit.
Well, we were a northern contractor as well. So that was what they were really fighting. They thought that they had the local people could do the same work. They couldn't come close. No. University didn't want them. No. That was above their pay grade. We built the original hospital. That's why we were selected. Mm-hmm. But the original hospital didn't have a medical school building per se, and it didn't have a dental school either. We built all of that. Mm-hmm. And the sloped glass, okay, that idea and that concept was taken from a project we did in Philadelphia. And that's where I came from, the Philadelphia office. Okay. And we did the same, it was the Franklin Plaza Hotel project, which we did the same thing, and the architect copied the idea. So.
And you're also developing for the St. Augustine Episcopal Church blueprint, right? Is that correct? A blueprint of how it used to look back in the day?
Yep. Yep. Okay. Through Charmaine's help, we're gonna produce that. Yes.
Okay.
That's easy. That's real easy. To give the public an idea of the scale, the height, the width, length of this little tiny church in that particular neighborhood. Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Are there any other comments or something that you would like to talk about that we haven't discussed for the time being? Or
No, not yet. No.
Maybe we could move towards maybe taking pictures, or would you like to do that after? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. All right. So I think, maybe Charmaine, maybe you could explain. Should we record it? Maybe explain this.
Yeah. Okay.
Would that work?
Yeah, it does.
Do you remember the years that the pictures were taken? Yeah, I probably wouldn't.
No, I would assume that I was about 10 or 12 as the Acolyte in this picture.
Do you remember any of the names in those pictures of the people around you?
One picture is this confirmation. Well, two of them are the confirmation class. And the last name, remember I said earlier in my interview that there was a Daniels, an Albert Daniels. Well, this is his wife. And I can't remember her first name. And then these two people, the last name was Crawford. They moved away from Gainesville at some point. And then I talked about Reverend Batchelder, who is the priest that I remember during the time that I attended. That's a picture of him right there.
That's right. Just hold it up for me. That way I can avoid the glare. Yeah, oh yeah, there we go. There we go.
Then you have a newspaper over there?
Yeah, early on, George and I discussed this sign that used to be out there that was a big wooden sign, black with white lettering. And I happened to come across this newspaper article that showed the black sign that I talked about. It also shows the front entrance to the church. And as you can see here, here's a parent bringing her kids to the other side of the building, which was the daycare center.
Is this one the Gainesville Sun or?
Yeah, this is the Gainesville Sun, dated August 20th, 1972.
Yeah, a lot of their files recently became digitalized now, all the way from 1910 all the way now to 2022. So yeah, that would be great to pull that information out, get those fresh copies, and I'll be sharing the material. This is good.
You got
one? Do we get this one yet, do we?
no.
Yeah. Without moving me well. Got better on the scanner. Let me see if I can just go. Okay, great. This is a cool picture here. Now, do you remember? You don't remember who took these pictures? Do you?
Oh no.
Yeah.
That was the nativity scene. That was one
Christmas
yeah.
pageant.
Still have that. Role play.
The daycare, the kids at the daycare.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you roll that for me?
It's still done here every year. Mm-hmm. It's real cute with the angels and the wings and.
They used to do that back in Oregon too.
Yeah. It's
Like,
beautiful. It's
One
beautiful.
year I got Joseph. I was like, yes. But I was like, the shepherd or something on the side.
I was always too tall.
Do you still remember some of the prominent community members that are still around here? I think last time you discussed the Chestnut family that attended.
Not the family. Not the family.
Cynthia Chester,
Cynthia,
who's now a commissioner.
when she first moved to Gainesville, and was employed by the University of Florida as a speech pathologist.
Yep.
She attended for a little while St. Augustine's, and then at the point that she married Charles Chestnut, she became a member of his church, Mount Pleasant.
Mount Pleasant.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any last comments that you would like to say, or anything that I might have missed out on, Charmaine? Or
no, I can't think of anything other than at the point that we get the marker, I'd like it to also reflect that it evolved from an original church that had a parochial school attached to it. It evolved into the daycare center, which my mom was a director for. I wish there was some way that I could find out what her capacity was in the parochial school. I have no recollection or any knowledge of that other than I knew that she was involved before it became a daycare center. So I would like the recognition of the evolving from the church parochial school into the daycare center.
I agree with you. I would immediately ask my brother, if I was you, if he has any recollection of family members that are still alive, okay, that would possibly know. Unfortunately, your aunt is not around. She probably would have known. Okay. I know she would have. Mm-hmm. But that's sad. But I would definitely have to say the best is, relatives or possibly a student or a student's family or what have you, But I know she probably had a big participation, and in it. And where was she educated, your mom, do you know?
My mother?
Yeah.
She and her sisters, two sisters, went to that old Lincoln High 2-story building. And I'm trying to think of what was the name of the principal that they've made his house into a museum now. And it's right across the street from that school now.
Aquin Jones?
Yeah, Aquin Jones.
Mm-hmm.
All of my uncle and my mom and her sisters attended what is now called Aquin Jones. They attended Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Lincoln.
Do you know which colleges they went or attended? Bethune-Cookman or Florida A&M?
I do know where my mom, but I can't think of the school. It wasn't. It was a black college. It might have been.
Ethel Waters and
no, it wasn't Edward. It wasn't Edward Waters. It was a college from South Florida that had a satellite college up here. My mom attended during the summers because she had a family and she was working full time, running the daycare. My Aunt Edith, she attended a Episcopal school in the Carolinas.
Yeah, there's one in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Big one. Mm-hmm.
But it was a black.
Yes, it's all black.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it's all black. I have a very, 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 very good friend of mine lives in Ohio, Cleveland, that attended that school. Really, really sharp guy. And it's still well known.
My Aunt
still
Belma
small though.
went to Florida A&M. I think maybe my Aunt Edith in her latter college years attended Florida A&M. So I think both of the aunts went to Florida A&M, but my mom didn't. And my brother, like I said, he went to Morehouse.
Mm-hmm.
and then he graduated from Bethune-Cookman.
Mm-hmm. Well, everyone in my mother's side of the family, Bethune-Cookman, that's where they originated from, Daytona Beach. And, well, back in my mother's day, you went to 3rd grade, 6th grade, and to go to high school, she had to go all the way to Daytona Beach, because that was the only black high school other than Jacksonville, and Ocala. So, you know, it was limited. Okay. In Micanopy, that was it, you know. But at any rate, everyone in the family graduated from primarily on my mother's side from Bethune-Cookman. My mother was a butthead. She went to Florida A&M and married this, so on and so forth. Okay. But at any rate, and he was from Jacksonville. So that was supposed to be my father, who I never knew. So one of them things. But yeah, my history, and Mary McLeod is a great aunt of mine from Bethune-Cookman. All teachers, and that was the way of everything. And everybody, if you were smart in school, you had to go to Bethune-Cookman to get a teacher's degree. But it's still a fine school for that, and nationally recognized, actually. So especially that in nursing, still superior. Mm-hmm. And my great aunt, well, my aunt, she taught for over 60 years, and in South Florida. She got her 2-year degree from Bethune-Cookman back in the day, and then got her 4-year, and then she got a master's in reading from Bethune-Cookman. She loved that school, And my oldest brother, who's deceased now, he played football for Bethune-Cookman. It's still a remarkable school.
And it's still private.
It still is.
It's not funded.
Nope. It's always been private.
Yeah.
And superior education there. Still. And but like it is here in Gainesville, Daytona Beach is separate and unequal too. Okay. Where Bethune-Cookman is the black section. Okay. Okay. And the Broadwalk and the beach, that's a whole different section. So 92, Highway 92 divides, who and where. And I don't know, it's just a mentality that was followed throughout the South, basically. Mm-hmm. And all your southern states have the same, geography to make persons of color separate and unequal, deliberately.
You could even see that up in Chicago, coming from Chicago, neighborhood segregated. The next street, right off the get-go when you're stepping into the next neighborhood. That one bridge, that one specific light, you just know it right off without even stepping in, you already know you're somewhere else. That's simple.
But I don't look at people that way. I've never looked at people that way. Never. Like I said, I was born and raised around, and we discussed in 1st and 2nd grade, melting pot. We did drawings about melting pots, And they didn't. I don't know. Maybe because I was the caboose all the time. Because see, when I went to school, you marched in by the height. But the shortest person was in the front, and the tallest was in the back. So I was always the caboose, and the class was considered the train, but I was the caboose, and everybody wanted to be in the back. But I was the tallest. Mm-hmm. I was taller than my teacher. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, I've enjoyed myself.
All right.
I'm very, very proud of Charmaine, and she gave a lot of very important information about the climate here in the South, and certainly specifically Gainesville, Florida, during her growing up, and she has a lot to say, and she said it, and I hope she can recall what her mother went through in the capacity at the school, at St. Augustine School. Because I would like to do just a separate segment on her mom and her aunt and her whole family, as a tree, basically, even her brother and what have you, whomever's alive and what have you, can shed specific light on what it was back in those days, and let people make their own decision. Okay, but if you're deprived of something, you don't know that you're deprived of it until you go in another environment and see the other environment thrive. That's the only way.
Rude awakening.
Yes. And it's called racism. It's alive and doing very well. Okay, unfortunately. So, but I unfortunately was not raised in that environment, so I really can't shed anything. That's why I'm helping, do what I do, but I can't look at nobody different that way. It's impossible for me. Mm-hmm. So I go by first names, not by ethnicities, So down here it's by ethnicities. He's one of them, I don't like that.
Are we still on the record? No.
We can stop?
Yeah.
All right.
I just.
Let's stop.
Then we'll conclude this interview.
We're done.
Okay.
Bye.